Hello, I'm Josh, and here are your questions about high-end headphones. Or Mandelbaum asks, what would I consider to be a good pair of two high-end headphones? He has a Susvara and an LCD5, and that really covers everything he needs, but he's wondering what other combinations I may have in mind. I guess recently in my comparison, I liked the Empyrean and the Diana TC because they complemented each other well. They were not good at the same things. There was not really a lot of crossover points. I might pick something that has more of a mid-range focus and then something that's maybe a little bit more V-shaped. I really loved the Sony Z1R, which was a closed back headphone. That did have a V-shaped sound signature, but it's probably the best V-shape that I've personally come across. And that headphone paired with something that is more mid-range focused or more technical and complete through the frequency range, I think would be good. So just as a comparison for you, something like that LCD5 and that Z1R, I think would be a great pairing because they would be good at different things. Because in my opinion, the area that you're most missing in your collection specifically is really good bass response. And I feel like that Z1R has really good bass response. Those headphones are incredible at other things, but I think bass, they're just a little bit behind what is out there. Camo Turtle 18 says, how close do headphones in the $500 to $1,000 range compare to these premium headphones? Are they 75% of the way there, less, more? What's the deal with it? Now, the range he's talking about was things like the very high end, like the flagships of companies like Odyssey, where their headphones are $4,500. They're very expensive. Now, I think this really depends on what specific headphones you're comparing, because there are headphones that achieve better performance in certain areas for cheaper, and depending on what you appreciate, the cheaper headphone might actually be better. A good example of this is like, if you really like sound staging, I think that the non-stealth Aria from Headphone and the HD 800S are probably the best sound staging headphones on the market right now. And even if you go drastically higher prices to like a Susvara, even an AB1266, you don't quite get the same sound staging capability as those. If I'm just gonna answer on the surface level of like the $500 to $1,000 category versus this ultra high end, I'd actually say it's higher than 75%. I'd say it's closer to 80 to 90%. A lot of the times what you're paying for on those ultra high end headphones is like the general sound signature that you're going for, but a little bit more refined than the previous versions. Now, I also think that $500 to $1,000 is a range where the headphone performance starts to really ramp up in quality there. You have a lot of headphones in that category that are super competitive, especially if you're looking on the used market. You can find some really great headphones. And it does actually make it very hard to justify a 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 times more expensive headphone that does close to the same thing, but only offers like a 10% improvement. Now, this may be a little bit different when you're really measurement chasing. I'm not really one of those people because I find that measurements are, they're fine for a partial understanding of the headphone. But ultimately I find that the headphone often sounds different than what the measurements would suggest, especially with two similar measuring headphones, and then you go and listen to them and they are different. And so to me, I really like to listen to stuff more than I like to look at graphs. So I personally think that about $500 to about $1,500 is typically the sweet spot of where headphones get really good, and they're better than the lower end headphones, but they're pretty close to the high end headphones as well. Okay, Sun Goku says, and this is I think a fair criticism, the whole review revolves around how it sounds out of the box, and that is fine. He is correct that it sounds mid-forward with a lack of bass and highs out of the box, but if you hear the LCD5, which is the headphone he's talking about, you can truly see its full potential, and it takes EQ very well, and it does. The LC5 is the best headphone that he's heard so far in terms of speed, detail, texture, and bass and lower mids. Unfortunately, Josh does not talk about how they sound EQ'd, so it's a bit of a downside for him, as it's the only way he can really enjoy the LC5 to its full potential. So I think every headphone can sound a little bit better with even minor EQs. Some require a lot of EQ. And I am unfortunately not as consistent as I would like to be in terms of reviewing a headphone with EQ. But the specific issue that I run into is that I don't really like having a specific target. I think that is an incredibly boring way to experience this hobby. Personally, I know a lot of people don't think that way, but that's just me. And since I don't have a target, I don't really have things that I want headphones to conform to sound better. Now, he is correct in saying that it can sound better with EQ. I did EQ it. It does sound better, like a lot of headphones, or basically every headphone. But the problem with my own methodology is that since I don't have a target, it makes it very hard to really see how close a headphone can get to it and judge every headphone compared to that. Now, sometimes I think it's worth mentioning in the review that you can get a headphone with technical problems and correct them with EQ and actually get a pretty good value headphone. The HD 8XX comes to mind. That's a cheaper headphone than the 800S, but you can make it sound pretty close to the 800S with some EQ correction. But that's also a headphone that I'm trying to match towards a different headphone of the same, like they're basically the same headphone, just with different tuning and like small physical property changes. But I'm also trying to explain that with this EQ, you can get a decent value out of it. Not a great value, but a decent value. When you're talking about a $4,500 flagship, that value idea really goes out the window. And I think anybody purchasing a $4,500 headphone, if you're doing it responsibly, should be aware of the benefits of EQ, so I didn't feel the need to personally explain it. So a lot of times with most reviews, I don't mention EQ. It's not specific to the LCD5. It takes a long time to cover that. And I think conforming every headphone to a personal target is just a boring way to listen to headphones. And so I do make minor adjustments just to see how it takes and how capable it is. And I mention it where I think it's relevant, but it's not something that I pursue all the time. Okay, Joshua Hardwick says, thanks for the review. Great work as always. For the Q&A, if you visualize a diminishing return graph for headphones, where would $3,000, $2,000, $500, $300, $200, $100, etc., where would they be? For those interested in buying a high-end headphone, is there a good second-hand market out there, depending on the headphone and the market in general? He also asked, can you go wrong with headphones? And while you potentially may not have an affinity towards the sound signature, are you pretty much guaranteed to get a great example of that specific signature? So this is a multi-part question. Let's break this down into stages. High-end products of any type really suffer from the law of diminishing returns, headphones included. That also includes the car market, the watch market. Anytime you get into a luxury product, it is rarely a effective cost to performance ratio. I once calculated how expensive the Diana TC was. I don't remember the exact dollar figure of it, but it broke down to be 11 times the cost per gram of a Bugatti Veyron. And like 44 times the cost per gram of like an average Lamborghini, which is nuts. Okay, now second part of his question, for those interested in high-end headphones, is there a good secondhand market out there? There is a good market. There are things like Headphone where you can buy from people with lots of ratings, lots of time spent on the website. And this is a decent way to buy. I would trust Headphone and a well-reviewed user over something like eBay. Of course, there are risks associated with it. You were talking about a very expensive headphone in some cases. Like even if you buy a used, like ultra high-end headphone, you can still be talking about $2,000, $3,000, sometimes even $4,000, depending on which one it is. And that is better than the cost of it new, but you're also dealing with used equipment, and you have no idea how much use it's had, how it was treated, whether they took it apart a bunch. That is a concern. There is one more big benefit of used gear, which is if you buy at the right price, you can often sell for that same price and not lose any money, but you get the experience of the headphone. But I would advise you to make sure you do research, because sometimes you buy a high-end headphone that nobody else really wants, and you can be sitting on it for a long time if you ever sell it at all. He also asked, can you go wrong with high-end headphones? Yes. While you potentially may not have an affinity towards the sound signature, are you pretty much guaranteed to get a great example of that signature? No. This is not like, I find that oftentimes the best version of a specific sound signature exists somewhere on the high-end market. Like if you want a very vocal focused signature, you can get that, and the best version of that is an expensive headphone, or the best bass, for example. But not every high-end headphone of that sound signature is going to be the best. So I would not say it's a guarantee at all. Jano Lim says, will most high-end stores let customers listen to these high-end headphones? Even though I don't plan on buying it, I really just want to experience the ultra high-end headphone sound to suffice my curiosity. I think it just depends on the store. Some of them have floor models. Definitive Audio in Bellevue, Washington has floor models of a lot of headphones. They obviously don't have every headphone out there, but you can kind of see like, okay, what's the advantages over my AirPods or something like that. Depending on the store, you might also have to deal with a very aggressive salesperson. Ultimately, you're walking into a store and trying to buy something that they're gonna get some form of either commission for, or the store is going to make money based off of the sale or something. So they want to sell you those headphones. Like with any business, I would not recommend abusing the system. I just think that's part of being a good person, is not, you know, taking full advantage of everybody all the time. But if you're just going in and listening to the headphones, if they're out, that's what they're there for. Kenny Chin says, is amp scaling a thing for efficient headphones that don't need a lot of power? It really depends. Typically, the more inefficient a headphone is, the more power it needs, and typically the more power it needs, the more you'll kind of feel the effects of the amplifier. In that comparison video that I just did between the Elite, the LC5, and the Diana, this is a great example. The Diana is a wonderful sounding headphone, but it's very affected by the amplification that you give it. But the Elite, which is also a wonderful sounding headphone, is very not picky. Like it really sounds pretty good off of a lot of different stuff. It's also very efficient, so it's easy to drive. And I honestly don't feel like you would need a crazy amplifier to make that thing sound good. And you can get away with something a lot cheaper than you could with the Diana, or a lot less technically proficient than you would need for the Diana. Siguz says, I'm gonna paraphrase here, he's more of a loudspeaker person, and he's tried a few medium range headphones like the Monolith M1060C, and he thinks that these are very competent, but he would never choose to listen to the headphones over his system, and he's wondering if he goes higher end in headphones, if they start performing better. Headphones are a matter of compromise. If you need to compromise on having a private listening area, or not wanting to make a lot of noise, or not having the full cash to throw down on a really, really good hi-fi speaker system, then you might want to buy a headphone. I think it depends on what you like about your speakers. If you're just listening for technicality, I've never heard a speaker as detailed as something like a Diana TC. Not even remotely. I've listened to $1 million systems, doesn't even come close to the total finite details, but it still is not going to give you full body bass impact like a good speaker system can. It's not going to give you crazy realistic sound staging where you feel like an entire orchestra is playing in front of you, or like at least it gives you the perception of that. And it's worth noting that no headphone is really going to sound like that. They're all going to sound like headphones. So depending on what you like in your system, you may find that no headphone on the market right now will satisfy that particular sound. Joa Gonzalez said, sorry if I mispronounced that. What's the best high-end headphone if you like bassy sound signature? If you need closed, Sony Z1R. If you can do open back, I would say LCD4 is pretty much still the best in my opinion, though you will have to buy it used. Laguna Kid 24 says Abyss needs to send TC to reviewers who do measurements as well. If they're confident in their product, then they need to do it. And Meze and Odyssey have already done this. I half agree with that, half not. I mean, ultimately, it's easy for me to sit here and claim anything as one of the reviewers that Abyss does send units out for reviews for. It'd be easy for me to sit here and say whatever. But what I think I most agree with, and this is just as a business owner myself, is Axel Worth's comment replying to this comment, which is that Abyss doesn't owe anything to anybody. I think that's true for Odyssey. I think that's true for Meze. I think that's true for Sennheiser. I think that's true for Abyss. If they want to send it to somebody, they can, but I don't think that they're obligated to send it to anybody. Ultimately, it's their stuff and they can choose to do with what they want. Again, it's easy for me to say that as somebody receiving it, but there are tons of companies who do not work with me, and that I think is completely within their right to choose to send me something or not send me something. All right, last question. Mr. Governative One says, with all three headphones featured in this video, that was the Elite, LC5, and TC, he says, being on upper end and having price tags to match, at what point would you consider the cost of performance gain to be highly diminished, if at all? I'm sure this is subjected to some degree, but is there a point where you say $500 headphone is 95% of what a $3,000 headphone is, for example? We kind of already answered this earlier, but I would like to answer this in a slightly different way. So if you're just basing it off of cost to value, none of them are worth it. I would say that most headphones over like $200-300 are probably not worth it for their performance improvements versus their dollar amount different. But the fact remains that on average, the more expensive headphones perform better than the less expensive ones. Not in every case, but on average. And if you want the better performance, you have to pay the higher price. And that ends up kind of being the way that just about every industry works. So from value perspective, no, not worth it. But if you want the performance, is it worth it? That really depends on you, your budget, and how much you value that extra performance. All right, guys, thanks a lot for the questions. Thank you very much for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.